You are listening to the
World Extreme.
World Extreme Medicine.
The World Extreme Medicine
Podcast.
In this session, we're going to be speaking about the upcoming Virgin Galactic space mission with Shawna Pandya. So we're thrilled to be joined by Shawna today, who is indeed a pioneering figure in both medicine and indeed space science, and is also the host of the World Extreme Medicine podcast as well. So Shawna has just made history by becoming the first female commercial astronaut from Canada, joining Virgin Galactic's all-female research crew. So her journey is nothing short of inspiring. She has trained as a physician and as a neuroscientist, but now as a member of the Spaceflight team dedicated to advancing human knowledge and exploration. So in this episode, what we're going to do is really explore her path, her organic journey into becoming an astronaut, but also the critical research she'll be conducting aboard Virgin Galactic spacecraft. And we're also going to look at what potentially the future of commercial space travel looks like, and also delve into the challenges she faces between balancing multiple roles in science, medicine, and indeed venturing into suborbit. Welcome, Shawna, to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Owen. It is a pleasure to be here, and it's really interesting being on the other side of the microphone this time around.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, it must be quite weird actually, because you are a prolific podcast host and indeed been on a guest on a number of podcasts, but hosted many of the World Extreme Medicine podcast episodes, which is fantastic. Shawna, I just wondered if I could just get you initially, just for listeners that might not have heard of you on the podcast, just to speak to your organic story, your background, and indeed what inspired you to sort of endure your kind of aspiration towards space travel.
Yeah, for me, I would go back to childhood. Like a lot of kids, I wanted to be an astronaut, and I just never grew out of that dream. I was lucky enough to be growing up during the 90s when Canada's first female astronaut, Dr. Roberta Bondar, went to space, and I thought, oh my gosh, we can do that. And from there, my imagination just took off, pun intended. And I thought, okay, well, if I thought that, well, hey, if Canadian women can go to space in order to do what Dr. Bondar does, I just need to follow her trajectory. I need to go study neurosciences. I just need to go study neuroscience, be a physician, and then go be an astronaut. And then my trajectory was set. And for the longest time, I was a neuroscientist and a physician. And as of this summer, I get to call myself an astronaut.
That's amazing. It is amazing, and it is an enduring passion. Only because I think I've seen some of your fundamental journey, and you really the intentionality and the consistent positioning, and actually just really hard graft every day is been exemplary just to watch that, Shawna. But could I get you to speak to the anatomy of the mission profile with Virgin Galactic? What is a Delta class aircraft in real terms? What's it going to look like, and when is it going to set off?
Yeah, so when we talk about spaceflight profiles, we talk about orbital versus suborbital. So Virgin Galactic is one of the suborbital commercial spaceflight providers out there, and they just retired their Unity class of spaceship. So Unity was the spaceship aboard which we performed our first mission. My teammate Kelly Girardi was our first researcher from the International Institute for Astronautical Sciences. And Delta will be similar. So it's just entered manufacturing in Arizona. And over the next 2 years, the spacecraft will be entering testing and then come online as an operational vehicle. So it will be able to hold more passengers. So when we talk about a suborbital mission, think about the world's highest roller coaster, in that you are just making an incredible trajectory and you're going in this epically high parabola. And once you reach apogee, there is this period of free fall. The main engines have cut off, and you get to experience several minutes of microgravity. So you really have to be ready to perform. You have to know your science inside out. You have to know the contingencies for your experiment, and you just have to be able to make the most of the time you have in microgravity.
So we'll dig into the research actually, Shawna, because I think it is fascinating. But before we go there, could I get you to speak to what it's like to be the first female commercial astronaut from Canada. How does that feel?
Yeah, for me, it just feels incredible. It's not something that I set out to do, but having that be part of the journey really, it does really feel like that I'm pushing forward this passion for spaceflight that I grew up loving, that I grew up admiring. And now the messages I get from young women at the start of their careers, moms of little girls, parents of little young children, of kids who want to follow in our footsteps. It's really humbling. It's really exciting. And it's also, there is this onus to perform and, be the best I can be, not just for myself and my team, but for a whole new generation of explorers.
No, absolutely, absolutely, and it is there's a certain element of being, like you say, inspirational to the next generation, actually, and actually being a role model, fundamentally, so that people can look up to you. Just behind that, touched on it before, and this is maybe a little deviation. There is a lot of intentionality, and there would be and there is never a straight path to these things. There's always, some micro failures and some deviations as you go. Could you maybe just speak for people that do, look up to you and really want to maybe even mimic you? Could you speak to the intentionality and the drive you've had to sort of embody every day?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, whether you're talking about becoming a commercial astronaut, excuse me, whether you're talking about being a commercial astronaut or a space agency astronaut, you have to love every step of the journey. You have to love science, you have to love your teammates, you have to love supporting ground operations, you have to love it even when it's hard, because it is a very long journey. And I remember talking to one of the Canadian Space Agency astronauts about this, and we were just kind of chatting. This was before either of us had a flight assignment, and he'd been, on his trajectory for a decade plus after being selected without a flight assignment. I have been part of the International Institute for Astronautical Sciences for close to a decade now. And, loving the operations and the spaceflight aspect of it is so key, because if you are kind of going into this saying, I only want to be an astronaut, but I don't have the patience for the long game and I don't have the patience for the day to day, I think you're going to burn out very, very quickly. And so the intentionality part comes in when it's sort of like, there's going to be days when you get to do amazing things like test spacesuits and fly zero G. And there's going to be days when you are doing ethics review after ethics review, followed by amendment after amendment after amendment. And that's all of that is part of, the journey. And it's, all of it comes, you can't say one makes you more of an astronaut than the other. The science aspect, the collegiality, the interpersonal dynamics, they all come into play.
So looking at that and sort of speaking to, because you have mentioned research, could we just deep dive on some of the primary research goals for the mission with Virgin Galactic? What are some of the mission of the research outcomes?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we have our stated priorities are in the areas of biomedical science and physical sciences, and we're still performing our payload down select. But the reason we've chosen these areas is because we're building on the research that we pioneered with our IIAS 01 flight. And so I was the scientific lead on the continuous glucose monitor that we flew to space. This is the first time in the world a continuous glucose monitor has ever flown to space on a suborbital flight. And the reason that that's important is because we know that longer periods of spaceflight, orbital spaceflight, lend even the healthiest of the healthy astronauts predisposed to insulin resistance, pre-diabetic changes, but we don't know how quickly that occurs. So our research is helping peel away the uncertainty about the time frame within that which that occurs. Secondly, when we talk about who gets to go to space, historically, it's been a bit of a medical genetic lottery in that the healthiest of the healthy are the ones who are going to space, and having a CGM or a glucose monitor is a disqualifying criteria. However, when we talk about democratization of access to space, especially in the era of commercial spaceflight, and seeing these medical restrictions change when we talk about having access to space, proving the safety and the viability of a CGM in a suborbital spaceflight is a step towards knocking down those barriers and a step towards access. And finally, when we talk about getting understanding into pathophysiological processes, specifically in this case, glucose metabolism and diabetic processes, putting normal physiology in an extreme environment and watching changes as they do or do not occur helps give us insight as to how normal physiological processes occur under typical 1G conditions on Earth. So by studying physiology in space, we can actually learn a lot about how diabetes functions on Earth.
So just to pivot slightly and look how you prepare, because like you said, it's very much not just about the operational mission itself. It's a lot about the preparation physically and mentally. Could you maybe speak to? You mentioned something really interesting recently, which is, you know, the good days and the bad days all go into the mix, and actually the real skill is transcending the good and the bad, and or indeed the challenging and the successful. Could you maybe speak to that mindset and how you prepare physically and mentally for a mission like this?
Yeah, absolutely. So with the physical, you know, that's a personal choice for me. It's kind of part and parcel of who I am. I grew up doing Taekwondo. I was a competitive martial artist. I competed at the international and world level. And these days, you know, I'm in the gym pretty much every single day. And that's by choice. For me, I really put weight behind the idea of physical therapy, and that for me it's, you know, time to recharge. It's time to step away from the computer and, you know, focus on the moment, or if I choose, you know, have a bit of a slower day and answer emails while on the bike. You know, there's a lot of ownership about what it takes to make myself feel and perform at my best, and physical therapy and physical activity is definitely part of it. When it comes to the mental, you know, definitely there's a lot of resilience, I would say, and mental fortitude that got me here. And that's something that I've written about, that I speak about quite often when we talk about psychological resilience. And in fact, one of my prior psychological resilience in long duration spaceflight and austere environments. And what we learn about resilience is that, first of all, it's not an innate trait. It's not that I'm born more resilient than you or you more than I. It's something that we can learn. And there's so many different models out there. But the one I subscribe to views resilience as this multifactorial model where we it comes down to positive self-talk. So telling yourself that you've got this, impulse control, resisting in those negative thoughts and the urge to give up, positive social supports. So also relying on your team to, you know, lift you up when you're down, breaking things down. So instead of viewing something as a monumental task, viewing this as a journey of one step at a time, and then finally mental rehearsal. So preparing yourself for the best and the worst case scenarios. So that's been a lot of what's gotten me there. And then, you know, I've always felt very prepared for this journey. I feel like it's something I was born to do. And, you know, when I've been asked about what the training's like, you know, if I'm scared to go up, I'm so ready. The one thing I didn't anticipate mentally is that when you enter the astronautics world and once your selection is announced, you are leveling up every single skill that you've learned in terms of operations, in terms of preparedness, the ability to learn across multiple domains, to bounce back when things are tough, and just take on monumental workloads. All of that it goes up at least a level of at least one order of magnitude. And so, you know, there's a lot going on behind the scenes on, you know, how do we coordinate as a team? How do we prepare the science? What science are we doing on parabolic flight to prepare? And, you know, the mentality that comes with this, it's never, oh, I have too much, or, oh, I'll do this tomorrow. There's no excuses, looking at my teammates, it's just get her done. So it's been, a lesson in just seeing as much as you can, you perceive the sky is not the limit. At this level, you're not even the sky is the limit.
That's really interesting, actually, Shawna, because I'm reading a book at the moment around deep work and actually how you focus deeply into one topic so that you can be your best, produce your best, and indeed sort of create your best in one domain. And I guess that tees me up quite nicely for the next question, which would be, because you are switching quite a lot, you're forced to become competent in multiple domains. And but that also kind of speaks to your past, because you're a doctor, so there's medicine, there's also neuroscience, and there's also training to be an astronaut. Multiple pulls on your time, really, and multiple demands to be competent in each of those sections. Could you maybe speak to the how you juggle, or indeed how you balance those? Because like you said, that there is a switching, and there is divides on the time. How do you manage to sort of balance the mix?
That's a great question. And so, I've long said that, when you're starting out and you're looking for opportunities, be open to saying yes, say yes to things you normally wouldn't. And then when you get to a point in your career where you're really working on things that you love, and there's so many great projects that you can contribute to, you also have to learn to say no, to make your yeses count. And for me, my passion has been space medicine. My expertise has been in space medicine. And now that the announcement has come, there's so many asks on being part of so many wonderful space medicine projects. But saying yes to one may mean spreading myself a little bit too thin on another. So learning to say no, while also realizing the value of these other projects, and recognizing that someone has also taken time out of their day to write to you, to invite to you. That part's important as well. So that's been part of it. And then also realizing that there's times in which you are just going to stay focused. For me, one of the places I'm the most focused is actually in the emergency department. And it's a little bit probably not what people would expect when there's so many. It can be pure chaos. It can be multiple alarms going on. There can be multiple emergencies happening. There can be multiple EMS crews coming in. But for me, it's, actually a place to focus, because there's no emails, there's no meetings, there's no phone alerts. This is what I'm focusing on now. So just having that context switching and being able to shut off certain signals or notifications, whether they're physical or whether they're digital, and then also being able to prioritize your time, I think for me has been really helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would agree with that. And I think there is a certain degree, especially within emergency medicine, of stress inoculation and being able to differentiate signal from noise, and but also just being able to, I think it's more about that anthropology of self, knowing when you yourself are stressed, being able to step back, step out of a situation cognitively, step into something else. And actually all that are great analogs for an actual space mission, because you'll have been in a place before when, like you said, there's maybe a resuscitation in bay one, there's an anaphylaxis case in bay two, there might be a trauma call in bay three, and carnage of sorts. But actually being able to differentiate and create order from chaos, take a deep breath, start to sequentially address things, all that really feeds into something like spaceflight, I'm sure, which probably has multiple demands on your time, but you have to prioritize, triage almost, and but also apply that really calm, consistent manner.
Yeah, that's absolutely it. And, I think emergency medicine has prepared me for, reveling in chaos, learning to be uncomfortably comfortable when it comes to exploration, because truly you are venturing into the unknown. And any time you're taking part in an extreme environment, anytime that you're taking part in space exploration. And so really it's, being okay with uncertainty, being okay with long periods of a lot happening, a lot of chaos, a lot of incoming signals and inputs, but also when there's long periods of time when you simply just need to sit down and do deep work and be okay with hours and hours of ethics reviews and science proposals. You just have to kind of take the emotionality out of it and just focus on execution.
So let's look at the future, actually, Shawna, and just look at the sort of how this mission profile is going to impact future space research and exploration. Could you maybe speak to what the aspiration is from Virgin Galactic and hopefully what you're hoping to emulate?
Yeah, I won't speak to Virgin Galactic's perspective. I'll speak from my own perspective in that I truly view space as and microgravity as the next great research laboratory. And we have shown that through our work both in parabolic flight and on our first IIAS-01 research mission. And, what we're seeing, whether we're talking about parabolic flight, suborbital, or orbital, is the increasing opportunities and insights that we get from sending science and chasing novel avenues in microgravity. And in this day and age, looking at lessons from the International Space Station, this is the age of pharmaceutical development in microgravity. One of the big pharmaceutical companies had this very interesting case study that came out last year, wherein they took Keytruda, which is a biologic medication, and it's used for chemotherapy, and typically patients have to go into hospitals and receive a monthly IV infusion, which of course, is a huge demand on the patient's time. It's a demand on hospital resources. And the cool thing about microgravity is protein crystals, drug crystals grow larger and more symmetrically. So that affects the composition of a drug. And so they were able to engineer a version of Keytruda that was more shelf stable to the point where it formed a formulation that allowed patients to inject this subcutaneously in their home. So they are no longer going to the hospitals daily. So there was a lot of upfront R&D costs to this. There was a lot of investment. But when you look downstream at the impacts and how we can both save patients' quality of life as well as save, the system multiple dollars on multiple fronts, there is a lot of promise and potential. And that's just one example. One other cool example is there's this company out there called Lambda Vision, and they are addressing pathology in ophthalmology, specifically retinitis pigmentosa and macular degeneration. And basically, they found that they need to be able to print certain retinal pigments layer by layer, but that's actually really hard in 1G. But if you do that in 0G, it allows you to print protein layers layer by layer. And so that's another application of the microgravity environment. So there's actually some really cool things you can do in 0G that you can't do in 1G. And then just depending on the profile and then the time you have in 0G, the science lends itself sometimes best to orbital flight, suborbital flight, or even parabolic flight.
Well, you made a great point earlier as well about the democratization of spaceflight, Shawna, and how, like you said, there really is if this is to become commercially viable and really accessible to the wider population, we are going to see various people with comorbidities and pathologies in space, because so it's like you said, it's really interesting to test and see what the variation is, what parabolic flight does, what suborbital flight does, and also, I guess, eventually accept that we might have to stabilize people within a space environment with evolving pathology. It wouldn't be beyond the bounds or realms of possibility to have almost some emergency medicine stabilization units in space where you have to stabilize.
Yeah, absolutely. So, now we get into a really fun conversation where we're talking about, in space, in situ triage and treatment. And so this becomes a really interesting conversation on the commercial front because we have a whole new set of comorbidities to to treat. And then on the other consideration, so this is one of my other areas of research is astronaut safety and rescue is, there are multiple concepts for space ambulances out there. There's some commercial companies working on being able to have vehicles that can act as emergency return vehicles. And there's also other concepts like always having on-demand launch capabilities so as to be able to make sure that no crew is stuck or stranded in space. And this is quite timely because we're seeing the Boeing Starliner episode play out in real time. And truly, this actually wasn't a case of astronauts being stranded or stuck because they do have access to the SpaceX Crew 8 vehicle if they need to evacuate in a timely fashion. And so all of these considerations are very interesting and very important to think about with the democratization of access to space, but then taking it to the next extreme frontier, talking about Mars exploration, deep space exploration, lunar exploration. When we're talking about evacuation capabilities and evacuating the International Space Station, if you needed to leave immediately and return to Earth on one of the return vehicles, it could be a matter of hours before you land back on Earth and get access to definitive medical care, which is not so different from some of our more remote and rural locations here on Earth. When you're talking about a medical emergency back on the moon, it's a 2 to 5 one-way journey, 2 to 5 day, one-day journey. It's a 2 to 5 day one-way journey. So then you really need to be able to stabilize, treat in situ, and have this element of prolonged or even super prolonged field care before you can get someone back to Earth. Now, when you look, there's actually this NASA medical concept of operations for Mars. And it's a document that's publicly available. It's a very interesting read. And basically, when you talk about what evacuation capabilities look like for Mars, they don't exist because it's a 6 to 9 month one-way journey to the red planet, depending on the alignment of the two of Earth and Mars. And basically, once you are injected into your trans-Martian orbit. Once you leave Earth's orbit, that's it. You cannot say, okay, I'm having second thoughts about this. Oh, we're having a medical emergency, time to go back. And compounding that is the distances between the two planets. So depending again on the alignment of the two planets, it's a 6 to 48 minute round trip communication delay. So between the time I say, hi, I have a medical emergency, and the time you say, okay, what's your emergency? It could be 48 minutes, which, is that time is essential. And finally, the last anxiety invoking piece about that is there is a period of time when the sun sits in between Earth and Mars, and there is a 2 to 3 week communications blackout. So you are essentially on your own as a crew on Mars for that period. So you really need to be able to recognize, diagnose, assess, and treat in situ. But what's really cool is this isn't as terrifying as it seems because this has actually been a push for innovation. And, there's concepts out there for AI as an aid in diagnosis, 3D printing for being able to print medical tools on demand. There's been this really interesting study from the Translational Research Institute in Space Health where they genetically engineered lettuce to be able to deliver drugs as well. So, we do see a lot of cool innovation coming from our hardest challenges in space medicine and human spaceflight. And there's also a lot of potential for returns for Earth.
No, absolutely. And as you said, it is an austere environment, and prolonged field care, it brings a whole new definition to prolonged field care, actually. Yeah. Absolutely. Shawna, can we just rewind for a second, actually, and just come back to something we touched on earlier, which was around being a role model and actually having certainly a number of teenage girls and boys just really looking up to you for inspiration. Could you maybe speak to how important the STEM fields are, and particularly in space science, and how important it really is to sort of invest quite early within science, and indeed within the STEM fields to really sort of almost as an enabler for where you are now.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the bigger consideration, rather than talking about, having STEM as a foundation for access to space, is letting young people know that they have a role to play in space. Whether they want to go in as an engineer, a physician, a pilot, or even as a journalist or a storyteller or an artist. The biggest piece of advice I have for anyone who's excited and passionate about space is, focus on what it is that you want to do, what you want to do in space. Don't try to pursue a route that isn't you. If you are a storyteller, don't pursue engineering because you think that's the only way to get to space, because you'll be miserable and you'll have a hard time being really good at it. And what we want in space is folks who are passionate, who are really, really, really good at what they do, and who are there to help elevate the whole team. And so, talking about STEM, definitely we need more women in STEM. We need more representation in STEM. And, there's been some powerful moments where I've had women just starting out in engineering who've been of the same cultural background and who come to me and say, seeing someone like you up there makes me realize I can do this. And, that's just so impactful, because I never thought about that. I never set out to do that, but it's, it really does make a difference in someone else's life. And then, talking about the aspect of finding a path for yourself, the advice is simple: make space for yourself and don't let anyone tell you you don't belong here, because you do.
Listen, that's powerful for a number of reasons. And I've known you, Shawna, now for it's coming on 5 years now. And I think all through that time, I have really understood every time I speak to you, it's about your self-talk is so affirming, but also there's so much conviction in your self-talk, and I think that you're really tapping into that. It's like, what am I telling myself? Because what you're telling yourself will fundamentally be a self-fulfilling prophecy, and it's an enabler for any to transcend any failure. Once you say, no, this is my path, and this is my passion, and this is my focus, irrespective of maybe micro failures along the way or deviations along the way. And your self-talk has always been like that. And it's powerful to see something like this come to fruition, where, you are the first female Canadian commercial astronaut. And, but coming from this really powerful self-narrative and self-talk.
Yeah, thank you so much for commenting on that. I think I just by nature I'm a happy person. Like, it's hard for me to have a bad day. And if I do have a bad day, I don't stay down for long. Um, and it'll have to be something, really major, like there was a code at work and, the patient didn't make it despite every best, attempt. And, things like that will, it do affect you. I don't think you can be human in this profession and, not be impacted. But yeah, it's always been about like, what's the highest I can go? And then once you reach that pinnacle, okay, great. It's not the finish line. It just means that there's, 6 more paths to explore. And I think that's why we do hard things. That's why we, say, what's up that hill if I climb it, even though it's, slippery and steep and full of snakes, who knows? But when you do those hard things, you actually you unfurl this whole new array of paths for you to follow. And so for me, it's always about what comes, how do I make this the best possible? How do I make myself a little bit better every day? And, how do what comes next? And what is my role within that?
So, Shawna, just as we, so to speak, go into land, we just a few more questions. One would be around how you see commercial space travel evolving in the next decade.
That's a great question. So, this really is an incredible time to be part of commercial space. And it's really funny because even when Kelly's spaceflight was announced in 2021, there's both personal messages between myself and her. This was before I even came on board as a scientist. When we were just friends, I said, saying that I will do everything possible to be at your launch. Like, this is incredible. And then even publicly, in media commentary, talking about like this is the dawn of a new age of access, of exploration, and wanting to be there myself. And so we're actually at the point where we're reaching that milestone within 3 years. And so I want what I've seen, with humans in terms of technology, and I think access to microgravity should be viewed as a technological platform, is humans are wonderfully creative. Look at what humans have done with being able to have access to their own smartphones, being able to broadcast themselves, being able to teach themselves in the age of digital media, social media, massive open online courses. And basically, I think in this era, humans are just going to surprise us, whether it's travel to space for leisure, whether it's for entertainment and coming up with new art forms and athletic events in microgravity, whether it's talking about new scientific discovery, new R&D, new technological innovation. I think this is just the beginning, and I'm really excited to be here with a front row seat for it.
That's amazing. It really is amazing, actually, Shawna. Just I've got so many questions, but I'm gonna bring the interview into a close shortly. But one would be, before I get you to sort of speak to just some take-home messages for people and sort of realization of dreams, really, which is one of the things which this certainly is. Could I get you to speak to initially the selection process, just to give people some kind of image or mental model of the selection process for becoming part of the Virgin Galactic research crew?
Yeah, and so typically, so from the Virgin site, you can go to space as a spaceflight participant or a tourist and go for a leisure ride, and that's a very, very long waiting list. Or you can go as a researcher, and you just have to be part of a credible research institution. So the the selection that I'm going to speak about is actually internal to our own institution, the International Institute for Astronautical Sciences, and truly, it's happened organically in that Kelly really set the standard when she flew to space, because working with her, it's so instructional, because I still learned so much from her and from Nora as well, and working very closely. But this is someone who is very, very focused, very, very detail oriented, very situationally aware, and truly a top tier microgravity operator. For me, that didn't come naturally. It's come through just having a lot of experience and having 12 parabolic flights under my belt, and just always really wanting to, hit my marks, and always wanting to excel. And so what it takes to be a double IIAS astronaut really comes down to 5 criteria. It comes down to science, service, team orientedness, community, giving back to this community that has had this mandate to be global, to be diverse, to have a commitment to emerging nations. So Ireland, Nora will be Ireland's first ever astronaut, to women and underrepresented groups, and to even groups who are historically underrepresented, like the LGBTQ community. And so when we talk about, the double IS mentality, it's those 5 pillars. And what's really cool is the other thing that's keeping me busy these days is that I've stepped up as the executive director for our astronautics and flight opportunities program. So creating that path forward for selection, training, education, representation, and ambassadorship amongst our astronauts. We truly are forging this new path in space that we haven't seen historically, because for the longest time, human spaceflight was solely through space agencies. And then it was through commercial avenues as tourists or as an employee of a company or through contests, which do exist out there. And for us, it's purely about the research. So being able to be at the forefront of blazing the trail in research and commercial astronautics, I still can't believe I get to do this. It just feels incredible.
So finally, Shawna, just to finish on just a few take-home points, really. I think we've touched on a lot in the interview. One of the things I think is really powerful, and you've spoken to this, is around inspiring the next generation and of potential commercial astronauts or otherwise. Like you said, the floodgates are starting to open. It's not certainly unilaterally the space agencies which are selecting anymore. Could you maybe speak to a few take-home points just for other aspiring astronauts, maybe in their teenage years or formative years, as they sort of migrate and look at what you're doing now?
Yeah, absolutely. So, let's go back to this idea of psychological resilience and, positive psychology. So there's this term in positive psychology called salutogenesis, and it means viewing adversity as a challenge to grow into the opportunity to rise to the occasion. So, we often hear the imposter syndrome thinking, I'm not good enough to be here, but taking the opposite of, what if I don't think I'm quite ready for this opportunity, but I'm willing to learn. So approaching every challenge in your life as something for you to take on, to learn more, to work hard and be better. Realizing that whatever you want to do in space, whether it is art, whether it is, public relations, communications, science, technology, engineering, there is a place for you. So work really, really, really hard to get there. Seek to be the best at it, what it is you want to do, and then just make space for yourself. And then do so with a team, because you'll go fast alone, but you'll go even further with the best, most supportive kind of team. So those would be my 3 takeaways.
Listen, that's amazing. That's absolutely amazing. Shawna, thank you for the past 45 minutes. It's been great just to get your thoughts and perspectives and indeed insights. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for this interview. This was a lot of fun, and I hope that there's some budding astronauts out there.
Thanks for listening to the episode. Please feel free to rate, review, and subscribe on whichever platform you're listening to. Please also head over to the World Extreme Medicine website, where you can find more engaging content on extreme medicine webinars and indeed a collection of courses from our global network, including humanitarian, disaster relief, expedition, space, military, tactical, and performance medicine. Thanks again.